It was midnight, and I was driving through back roads I hadn't seen in years. Fields stretched out endlessly on either side, dotted with an eerie mist that clung low to the ground. I was out here because of a phone call, one of those cryptic, static-laced messages that you can't ignore. "Get to the farm," it had said. "You're the only one who can help." The farmhouse appeared like a shadow in the distance, the kind of place you see in horror movies but never imagine visiting. The closer I got, the more I could make out details. Windows that should have been boarded up stared back at me, dark and hollow, as if waiting for something. I parked by the barn and cut the engine. Everything was silent except for the faint rustling of trees. But then a sound. A muffled cry, distant but distinct, coming from the direction of the fields. It was a human sound, filled with fear and pain. I walked slowly, trying to push down the fear gnawing at me. The crops towered over me as I stepped deeper into the field, and the cry grew louder. Then, something moved in the corner of my vision, a shadow darting between the cornstalks. My heart pounded, but I pressed on, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, a whisper that seemed to come from all around me. "They're watching." I whipped around, but no one was there. Just rows of corn, swaying softly under a non-existent wind. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. But before I could take another step, the ground shifted beneath me. I stumbled, catching myself on a nearby stalk. But when I looked down, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a footprint, large and deep, and it was still wet. The footprint was massive, too big to belong to any animal I knew. Its edges were smeared, as if whoever left it had been dragged. The chill of fear clawed up my spine, but something else compelled me forward, pushing me to follow the trail. I continued down the row, every step feeling heavier. The air grew thick, almost tangible, pressing down on me as though the very atmosphere was trying to warn me away. Then, faintly, I heard it again. A whispering, but now more voices, layered over each other like a distorted choir. I froze as the voices rose in volume, crescendoing into a frenzied murmur that echoed through the fields. I strained my ears, trying to make out words, but all I could catch were fragments. The watchers, waiting hungry. Just then I saw it. A figure hunched and lurking at the end of the row. My breath hitched. The figure was backlit by a sickly glow coming from the farmhouse, casting it in an inhuman silhouette. The person, if it was a person, seemed to sway slightly, as if struggling to stay upright. But when I took a single step closer, they jerked and bolted into the corn. My instincts screamed at me to run in the opposite direction, but I forced myself to follow, weaving through the maze of stalks. The figure ahead moved impossibly fast, darting and weaving like a shadow on the wind. And then, without warning, it stopped. I approached cautiously, heart pounding, and finally got a clear look. It was a man, disheveled and dirt-streaked, his eyes wide with terror. He held a finger to his lips, signaling for silence, and gestured for me to come closer. "They're here," he whispered, barely audible. His gaze darted around as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows any second. "They come every night. Looking for us." "Who?" I managed, voice shaking. He glanced around, wild-eyed. "The things in the field. They're not human. They're not anything." Before I could process his words, the crops around us began to rustle. The sound was subtle at first, like a light breeze, but then it grew louder, surrounding us, closing in. The man grabbed my arm, his grip icy and desperate. "They're coming." My heart thudded as we crouched together in the narrow corridor between the rows, barely daring to breathe. The rustling grew louder, shifting from one side of us to the other, circling. I couldn't see anything, but I felt eyes on us. Countless, invisible eyes that watched and waited. The man beside me clamped his hand over his mouth, trembling as the sound intensified. And then, through a gap in the corn, I caught a glimpse of movement. It was tall and slender, moving low to the ground in a way that didn't look natural. The thing's limbs were stretched impossibly long, almost as if it was on stilts, but its motions were fluid, predatory. The man squeezed my arm, his eyes wide with terror. "They're like shadows," he breathed, voice quivering. "They blend with the night, slip between the rows, always searching. You can't let them see you or hear you." I tried to pull my arm free to steady myself, but his grip only tightened. He wasn't looking at me. He was fixated on the creature gliding through the corn. It was getting closer, its elongated body stretching and shifting with each step, as if it were made of smoke bound together by some unseen force. Then it stopped. In the narrow space between the stalks, it turned its head toward us. I held my breath, praying it couldn't see me through the thick shadows. But as I watched, the thing raised a twisted, bony hand and pointed. Directly. The man beside me let out a choked scream, scrambling to his feet and bolting down the row. He didn't make it far. The creature blurred forward, moving faster than I could track, and in an instant, it was on him. I wanted to look away, to shut out the horror, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the scene. The thing lifted the man by his throat with one of its elongated limbs, holding him aloft as if he weighed nothing. The man's screams echoed through the field, raw and piercing, before cutting off abruptly. I pressed myself flat against the ground, squeezing my eyes shut, heart hammering. I could hear the creature moving away, its steps slow and deliberate as it dragged something heavy behind it. The air grew still, leaving nothing but the oppressive silence of the corn. I waited, barely daring to breathe, until the silence became unbearable. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and in the faint light from the farmhouse, I saw the smear of red on the dirt where the man had been. I stayed crouched in the dirt, my pulse deafening in my ears. The smear of red glistened wetly in the moonlight, trailing off into the shadows. Part of me knew I should turn around, run back to the car, and leave this cursed farm behind. But I couldn't, not with the unnatural silence closing in around me. So thick and heavy it felt like it was swallowing every sound. My body moved on instinct, urging me forward, deeper into the field, following the direction where the creature had vanished with the man's body. Every step felt heavier, as if something was pulling me back, begging me to stop. But something far darker and far more stubborn kept me moving forward. The corn thinned as I walked, and then I saw it. An opening up ahead, a small clearing in the middle of the field. And at the center of that clearing was an old well, crumbling and overgrown, barely visible under the tangle of dead weeds and vines wrapped around it. But that wasn't the worst of it. Around the well lay piles of clothing. Some were tattered, others disturbingly fresh-looking, as if they had just been left behind. Shoes, shirts, jackets. They were all scattered around in messy heaps, abandoned in the dirt. I swallowed hard, my stomach churning as I approached. The air around the well felt wrong, colder and sharper, and a sour, metallic scent stung my nostrils. I forced myself closer, peering over the edge. The darkness inside seemed to stretch infinitely down, but as I leaned forward, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a ripple, like something shifting just beneath the surface of water. And then, faintly, I heard it again, that whispering. This time, though, it wasn't coming from the field or the trees. It was coming from below. I froze, straining to listen, and the words grew clearer, layered over each other, voices tangled and tortured. They were pleading, desperate cries echoing up from the depths of the well. "Help us! Please, God, help us!" The whispers spiraled up from the darkness, each one sharper and more frantic than the last. Then they shifted, twisting into a low, guttural growl that vibrated through my bones. I staggered back, clutching my ears as the growl rose to a deafening pitch, almost human but warped, hollow, as if it was coming from 1,000 throats at once. I stumbled away from the well, but I was too slow. I felt something cold and slimy wrap around my ankle, dragging me down to the dirt. I twisted around, staring in horror as a black, sinewy arm, covered in writhing shadows, reached up from the well, its fingers curling around my leg. I kicked and thrashed, but its grip was unbreakable. My screams were swallowed by the night as it began to pull me toward the well, closer to that endless pit of darkness and whispers. But just when I thought I was done for, I heard a voice, low, barely audible, but real. "Get up, run. Don't look back." The grip around my ankle loosened, just enough for me to pull free. I scrambled to my feet, my leg throbbing as I bolted from the clearing. I sprinted through the field, the corn whipping against my face, the whispers chasing me, hissing threats and promises, growing louder with each step. I burst out of the field and onto the dirt road, breathless and shaking, and I didn't stop running until I reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, hands slick with sweat, finally wrenching the door open and throwing myself inside. As I started the engine, I dared one last look back at the farmhouse. Standing at the edge of the field, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. A twisted silhouette, tall and thin, watching me with hollow, dark eyes. And beside it, the well, now pulsing faintly with a sickly green glow, as if it were breathing. I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing down the road, the whispers fading into the distance but echoing in my mind long after I'd left the farm behind. I drove in a blind panic, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, replaying every horrible image from the farm, every whisper that seemed to still echo in my ears. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, where the distant glow of streetlights felt like some small salvation against the darkness that clung to me. But as I slowed down, something shifted in the rearview mirror. My heart sank. Through the thin layer of dirt on the glass, I saw it, the faint, pulsing green glow of the well. It was far off, barely visible, but somehow, it was there, trailing me down the road. I tried to shake it off as exhaustion, a trick of my mind. After everything I'd seen, surely I was just imagining things. But the glow stayed, steady and unrelenting, a reminder of what lay back there, waiting in the dark. Then my phone buzzed, jolting me. I didn't want to answer it, didn't want to hear any more strange voices or cryptic warnings. But the name on the screen was a familiar one, my brother. I fumbled to answer, desperate for the sound of someone real. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. I let out a shaky breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know. Something happened at the farm. Something I don't even know how to explain. He was quiet for a moment, and then, in a tone that sent chills down my spine, he said, "You went back there?" His words made me realize something. He knew about the farm, and he sounded terrified. I pushed him for answers, for anything that could explain what I had just experienced. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Look, there's something I never told you about that place. Our family, we weren't the only ones tied to it. There were others, people from the town who used to live nearby. They disappeared, all of them. And the well, it was sealed for a reason." A heavy pause filled the line, and then he added, "No one knows what's at the bottom of it. They say it's older than the farm, older than any of us. Something ancient." My stomach twisted as I remembered the whispers, the pleading voices that had echoed up from the well. I hadn't told him about those, but somehow he already knew. "Whatever's down there," he continued, his voice trembling, "it wants people. Takes them, keeps them. Once it has you, you're part of it. Forever." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. "But I got away," I whispered, almost to convince myself. Another silence, longer and more unsettling than the last. And then he said, "Did you?" A shiver ran down my spine, and I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The faint glow was still there, pulsing rhythmically, as if it were breathing. It was following me. The realization hit me like ice water. Whatever that thing was, whatever ancient, twisted force was bound to that well, it wasn't letting me go. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling trapped even as I sped down the open road. The green glow in the mirror pulsed steadily, a heartbeat of something unnatural, keeping pace with me no matter how fast I drove. "Listen to me," my brother's voice was taut with urgency. "You can't go home. It'll follow you there, just like it's following you now. You have to go somewhere it can't reach. Somewhere safe." "Safe? There's nowhere safe from this," I snapped, feeling the fear clawing at my chest. But deep down, I knew he was right. If I went home, it would follow. And if it followed, I didn't want to think about what it might do. I asked him, barely holding back the panic in my voice, "Where do I go?" He was silent for a moment, and then he said, "Do you remember the old church off the highway? The one that's always empty?" The image came to mind immediately. An old, crumbling church, long abandoned, its doors weathered and its windows blackened. It was isolated, surrounded by nothing but miles of fields, an eerie relic that locals avoided. The stories about it were enough to keep anyone away. But now, in the face of what was chasing me, it felt like my only hope. "Get there," he urged. "People say the place is hollow ground, built on something even older than the farm. Maybe it's strong enough to hold it back." I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the accelerator, speeding toward the highway and hoping that this ancient place might somehow protect me from whatever horrors were crawling out of the farm. The road blurred as I tore through the dark countryside, the trees whipping past in a dizzying haze. But every few moments, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, and that glow was still there, unwavering, a sickly beacon in the night. Minutes later, the old church loomed ahead, silhouetted against the moonlight. It looked as decrepit as I remembered, its paint peeling, its steeple leaning at a precarious angle. I skidded to a stop and jumped out, half expecting the glow to surge forward and consume me. But to my shock, it halted at the edge of the church's grounds, like an invisible barrier was holding it back. The glow pulsed angrily, shifting and writhing like it was searching for a way through. I stumbled up the stone steps and pushed open the heavy wooden doors, nearly collapsing as I crossed the threshold. The inside of the church was dark and cold, and the silence was so complete it felt suffocating. But I could feel something, like the weight of centuries pressing down on me, as if the walls held secrets far older than anything I could understand. The glow remained outside, pulsing with a furious intensity, but it didn't move closer. I slumped against a pew, catching my breath, but the silence only made my nerves worse. Felt like the very air in the church was watching me, waiting. Then, from the shadows, a faint whisper drifted through the empty space. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, staring into the darkness. The whisper came again, closer now, echoing from the altar at the front of the church. "Once you open a door, it cannot be closed." A shape began to form in the shadows near the altar, something tall and indistinct, like a figure draped in darkness. I held my breath as it moved closer, gliding silently down the aisle, its features blurred and shifting. As it approached, the temperature dropped, and the air filled with the smell of old earth and decay. I took a step back, heart pounding, as the figure's face came into view. A hollow, sunken mask, with eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds of darkness. It stared at me, unblinking, as if it could see everything I had seen, everything I had done. "You brought it here," it whispered, its voice a hollow echo. "The thing from the well. Now it knows this place. And now," it paused, its eyes narrowing, "now it will take you." I backed away, panic gripping me as the figure pointed a skeletal finger toward the door. Slowly, the green glow began to seep through the wood, as if the barrier was weakening, the ancient protection of the church crumbling under the weight of whatever malevolent force I had unleashed. I turned to run, but the doors slammed shut, sealing me inside. The figure stepped closer, its voice turning into a chant. Words I couldn't understand, but that filled me with a primal dread. The walls of the church seemed to warp and twist, bending toward me, as though they were closing in. Desperate, I screamed, my voice lost in the darkness, but the figure only watched, silent and unmoved, as the green glow finally broke through, flooding the church with an otherworldly light. The light flooded in like a tidal wave, thick and suffocating, washing over the pews, the walls, even the shadowed figure that seemed to vanish into it. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes as the green light twisted and pulsed, casting unnatural shadows that writhed and danced across the ancient stone walls. And then I heard it again. A voice, layered and distorted, calling my name. But this time, it wasn't the faint, distant whisper I'd heard in the field. This was something far more powerful, a voice that seemed to come from within the light itself. "Come closer." I felt an inexplicable pull, like my feet were rooted to the spot, dragging me forward against my will. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to listen. My legs moved as though guided by invisible strings, each step bringing me closer to the altar, where the light grew brighter, more intense, a swirling vortex of green that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heartbeat. I tried to stop, to turn back, but my body continued forward, drawn like a moth to a flame. And as I neared the altar, the light shifted, parting like a curtain to reveal something impossible. There, standing at the center of the glow, was the figure of a man I recognized. It was my grandfather, the one who had owned the farm before me, the one who had always warned us to stay away from the well. He looked exactly as I remembered him, down to the old, faded work clothes and the weathered lines on his face. But his eyes were hollow, filled with the same sickly green light that flooded the church. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, only lifted one hand, beckoning me closer with a slow, mechanical motion. I felt a surge of hope, a foolish, desperate hope that somehow he had come to save me, to protect me from the horror I had unleashed. But as I stepped closer, the illusion shattered. His skin began to peel, flaking off in pieces that drifted into the air like ash. His face contorted, his jaw stretching unnaturally wide, his mouth splitting open to reveal row after row of blackened, rotting teeth. His hand, still outstretched, twisted and morphed, the skin peeling back to reveal twisted, sinewy tendons and bone, stretching out toward me. A low, guttural growl echoed from his mouth, a sound that was neither human nor animal. The words that followed were garbled, a language I couldn't understand, but their meaning was painfully clear. I was not meant to escape. I stumbled back, but the light surrounded me, a wall of sickly green pressing in from all sides. I could feel it creeping over my skin, cold and clammy, like fingers wrapping around my throat. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, overlapping until they became a single, deafening voice. "You are bound to us. You brought us to this place, and now you will stay." I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. My body felt numb, drained of strength, as if the light itself was siphoning the life from me, piece by piece. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, twisting into faces, contorted and screaming, their mouths open in silent agony. And then I realized they were the faces of the others, the ones who had disappeared, the ones the well had claimed. They were all here, trapped in the light, their souls bound to the darkness that lurked within it. And then, through the haze of light and shadows, I saw it. The well. It was here, somehow, inside the church, towering above me, its depths stretching down into an endless darkness. The whispers grew louder, voices rising in a twisted harmony that vibrated through my bones. And from the darkness of the well, something began to emerge. A hand, twisted and gnarled, its fingers impossibly long, reaching up toward me. My mind reeled, and every nerve in my body screamed to run, to get away, but my legs refused to move. The hand continued to rise, followed by an arm, then a shoulder, as the thing crawled up from the depths, pulling itself free of the shadows. Its face was a nightmare, hollow eyes that glowed with the same sickly green light, a mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, its teeth sharp and glistening. It stared at me with a hunger, a dark, insatiable hunger that promised an eternity of suffering. With the last shred of strength I had, I forced myself to move, stumbling back toward the door. My fingers clawed at the wood, desperate to escape, but the door remained sealed, as if fused with the walls. And then, just as the creature reached the edge of the well, the light began to flicker, dimming and surging erratically. A deep, resonant voice filled the room, a voice that was neither human nor beast, echoing from somewhere beyond. "Leave this place," it commanded, each word reverberating through the air like a thunderclap. The creature froze, its head snapping toward the light, its expression twisted with fury. The voice repeated, louder this time, filling the entire church with a force that shook the walls. "Leave," and just like that, the light surged one last time, blinding me. When it faded, the church was empty. The creature, the figure of my grandfather, even the green glow, everything was gone. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my mind spinning, unable to process what had just happened. The silence in the church was overwhelming, the kind of silence that felt ancient, untouched, like something had restored order to a place that had been teetering on the edge of ruin. I stumbled to my feet and pushed the doors open, stepping out into the cold night air. The fields were silent, the farm a distant shadow in the moonlight. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The chill of the night hit me hard, cutting through the shock and exhaustion that had settled over me. My body felt like it was moving on autopilot, one shaky step after another away from that cursed place. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I had to put as much distance between myself and that church as possible. But as I reached my car, a creeping sense of dread clawed its way back up my spine. The quiet wasn't right. The wind, the trees, even the chirp of crickets. All of it was dead still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I paused, hand on the car door, and glanced around, scanning the darkness for any sign that something was still following me. And then I saw it. A single light, small, faint, and green, hovering at the far edge of the road like a distant, watchful eye. "No," I whispered, barely audible, as the horror washed over me. I had thought the church, the ancient presence within it, had saved me, had banished whatever force I had stirred. But that light was a cruel reminder that some things don't simply disappear. They follow. Without another thought, I dove into the car and slammed the door, heart racing as I started the engine. The headlights blazed to life, cutting through the darkness, but that green glow remained, untouched and unmoving, as if mocking me. I floored the gas, tires screeching as I tore down the dirt road, praying I could outrun it, that somehow speed or distance would make a difference. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, the light was still there, gliding along behind me, keeping perfect pace no matter how fast I went. I couldn't tell how far or close it was. It seemed to stretch and shrink with each turn, sometimes just a flicker in the distance, other times glaring brightly in my mirror. As I drove, fragments of my brother's warnings echoed in my mind, intertwining with the whispers I'd heard from the well. Asterisk, once you open a door, it cannot be closed. You are bound to us, forever. Asterisk. My heart pounded harder, the reality sinking in. This wasn't something I could just drive away from or hide from. Whatever had crawled out of that well was now a part of me, a mark I couldn't erase. I was bound to it. Lost in a daze of panic and exhaustion, I realized I had driven far off course. The familiar fields and trees had given way to thick woods, twisted and dark, swallowing the road in shadows. I didn't remember making the turn, but somehow I was deep in unfamiliar territory, the road narrowing until it was barely more than a gravel path winding into the dense forest. I slowed, hesitating as the headlights swept over the gnarled branches overhead, casting distorted shadows that clawed at the edges of the light. The glow was still behind me, a steady, unyielding reminder that no matter where I went, it would be there. But then, as I peered into the darkness, I saw something strange up ahead. An old rusted gate, half open and leaning to one side, marking the entrance to what looked like an abandoned property. The remnants of a fence stretched out on either side, disappearing into the shadows, and beyond the gate stood the dark outline of another building, half hidden by the trees. I didn't know why I felt compelled to stop, but a force stronger than fear seemed to draw me toward the gate, urging me to go inside. Maybe it was a faint hope that I could lose the glow here, hide within whatever haunted remains lay beyond those rusted bars. Or maybe it was the whisper of something older, something connected to the ancient force that had been awakened tonight. With one last look at the glow in my mirror, I cut the engine and got out, the silence swallowing me once again. The gate creaked as I slipped through, and I found myself walking slowly up a narrow path toward the building. A dilapidated farmhouse, its windows shattered, its walls warped with age and neglect. As I stepped closer, I could feel a presence, something watching from within, and the air grew thick with an almost tangible malice. I hesitated, but that strange pull urged me forward, leading me up the broken steps and through the sagging doorway. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the faint, acrid smell of decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the empty rooms as I wandered deeper into the house. Shadows clung to every corner, twisting and shifting as I moved, and I could feel that presence growing stronger, like a dark, hungry thing lurking just beyond the edge of sight. And then, from somewhere deeper within the house, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like a heartbeat against the silence. I followed the sound, each step heavier than the last, until I reached a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The tapping grew louder, echoing up from below, and I knew I had to go down. I descended slowly, each step sinking deeper into the dark, and as I reached the bottom, I found myself in a low, narrow room lined with old, crumbling shelves. At the center of the room stood a table, and on it, a small glass jar. Inside, suspended in murky green liquid, was a single human eye. The eye was open, staring straight at me, and as I looked into it, I felt a surge of terror so intense I could barely breathe. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling the room with 1,000 voices, each one clawing at my mind. Bound to us, forever, never escape. The eye blinked, once, slowly, and the voices swelled, rising to a deafening crescendo. The walls began to close in, the shadows stretching and twisting, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. I stumbled back, my hand finding the wall, fingers clawing for the stairs. The voices were all around me, pressing in, crushing me under the weight of their ancient rage. I bolted up the stairs, racing through the house and back out into the cold night air. The green glow was gone, but I didn't stop running, didn't look back as I tore down the path, through the gate, and back to my car. As I slammed the door and sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped, that the thing from the well had left something behind, a piece of itself that would always be with me. And as I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, I saw it, the faint outline of that eye hovering just behind me, watching, waiting. I knew then that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, bound to me, forever. The days after that night blurred together, every hour tainted with the suffocating knowledge that I wasn't alone. No matter how much daylight flooded my room, how many locks I secured on my doors, I could feel it. Something watching, waiting, hidden just beyond the veil of the ordinary. It started with small things. The faintest hint of green glinting from the darkest corners of my house. Shadows that stretched and twisted just a little too far. I'd be walking down my hallway, catching a glimpse of that single green eye reflected in the glass of a picture frame or a mirror. But when I'd look again, it would be gone, leaving only the quiet, pressing sense of dread that had become my constant companion. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see it. The well, the eerie green glow, and that twisted figure clawing its way out of the depths. And in the silence of my sleepless nights, the whispers would return, a soft, insistent murmur that seemed to seep from the walls, filling my room with an oppressive, otherworldly presence. One night, as I lay wide awake in bed, I heard a soft tapping sound from the corner of my room. My heart stilled. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, that I was letting my fear get the best of me. But the tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like fingers drumming against the wall. With my breath caught in my throat, I sat up and scanned the room. At first, I saw nothing but shadows, distorted and dancing in the faint light filtering through the blinds. But then, in the far corner, something moved. A dark shape, subtle and almost unnoticeable. But there, I froze, unable to look away as the shape slowly took form, solidifying into a figure. It was tall, its limbs elongated and twisted, as if they had been stretched beyond the limits of human anatomy. And then I saw it, the eye, glowing a sickly green from the center of its face, unblinking, fixed on me. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure took a step closer, its body moving with a horrifying, fluid grace, the eye never leaving mine. The whispers filled the room, louder now, echoing in my mind. You cannot hide. You cannot escape. You are bound to us. The thing stepped closer, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me, seeping into my skin, freezing me to the core. My heart hammered in my chest, my body paralyzed as it leaned down, its face inches from mine. The green eye filled my vision, So close I could see its intricate details. The strange, swirling patterns, the depthless black pupil, the faint reflection of my own terrified face staring back at me. Then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 voices layered together, it spoke. Asterisk, you opened the door, and now you will keep it open. Forever. Asterisk. I felt a cold hand brush against my face, and just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The room was empty again, but the silence was deafening, thick with a lingering sense of malice that clung to the air. I collapsed onto the bed, shaking, gasping for breath, but I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, desperate and exhausted, I went back to the farm. I don't know what I hoped to find, but something inside me knew that if I didn't face this curse, it would haunt me until the end of my days. The well loomed in my mind, a dark, gaping wound in the earth that had opened something I could never close. When I arrived, the farm was eerily still, the fields quiet, as if holding their breath. The barn doors creaked as I passed, but the house itself seemed untouched by the horror that had consumed it. I made my way to the well, feeling an invisible weight pressing down on me with each step. The well was exactly as I remembered, crumbling, overgrown, its depths hidden in an impenetrable darkness. I stood at the edge, staring down, feeling that same pull, that same sense that something was watching from below. I know you're there, I whispered, my voice trembling but defiant. What do you want from me? For a moment, there was only silence. But then, from the depths of the well, a voice rose, soft and insidious, a chorus of whispers that filled the air around me. The door must remain open. A surge of anger flared within me, overriding my fear. Why me? I shouted, my voice echoing down the well. Why did you choose me? The whispers fell silent, and then a single voice, clear and cold, answered. Asterisk, you were the one who listened, the one who came when we called. Asterisk. I staggered back, the weight of their words settling over me like a shroud. All this time, I had been the one who answered their summons, who opened the door to something ancient and malignant that should have stayed buried. But as I looked down into that darkness, I knew what I had to do. If they wanted the door open, then I would give them exactly what they wanted. With a final, defiant glance at the well, I turned and walked back to my car, a strange, calm resolve settling over me. I drove to the edge of the property, where the ancient church sat abandoned and silent. Inside, I prepared a ritual. I lit candles, gathered symbols of protection, and stood before the altar, channeling all the fear, the rage, the desperation that had consumed me. And as I spoke, invoking ancient words of binding and banishment, I felt the weight of the presence pressing in, swirling around me, desperate to escape. The green glow filled the room, pulsing, thrashing against the walls, and for a moment, I thought it would overwhelm me. But with a final surge of strength, I shouted, "You cannot have me. You are bound to this place. Forever." The light flickered, dimmed, and then, slowly, faded into nothingness. The silence that followed was absolute. The church was empty, the air light, as if a burden had finally lifted. I walked out into the dawn, feeling a strange peace settle over me. The green glow was gone, the voices silenced. The door, I knew, was finally closed. But as I reached my car, I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked back at the church one last time, and for just a moment, in the faint morning light, I thought I saw a single green eye watching me from the shadows. The door might be closed, but I knew some doors never truly lock. And somewhere, in the darkness, it was still waiting. The days after the ritual at the church passed quietly. The weight of that green glow, the feeling of being watched, even the whispers, all of it had vanished, as if whatever ancient force had pursued me had finally released its grip. I tried to move forward, tried to convince myself that I was free. But the peace was fragile, thin as glass, and deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd only delayed the inevitable. One evening, I decided to leave town. My life had unraveled in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. I wanted distance, wanted to erase the memories of the farm, the well, and that single green eye. As I packed my things, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a flicker of green in the corners of my house. But there was only silence, empty and final. I drove until nightfall, stopping at a quiet motel in the middle of nowhere. The air was cool and calm, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. I checked into my room, the old key clinking in the lock as I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The room was plain, with a single lamp casting a soft, warm glow. I sank onto the bed, exhaustion settling over me, and let out a long, shaky breath.